I'm actually honored to be here and very much happy to be on a panel under the auspices, to some degree, of the Edmund Burke Society. That's Edmund Burke, I think, is one of the few intellectuals with whom the Brits, the Americans, and Indians can all be happy. As a great figure in British conservatism, he really articulated the idea that one can look to one's tradition as a source of progress and improvement, not merely as a kind of a stand-pat approach. But he also opposed the vicious rule of the British East India Company and did his best to bring them to account. And he furthermore was one of the strongest voices against British efforts to suppress the American Revolution. So there's a lot there for us to think about. And as a conservative movement begins to take shape around the English-speaking world, we could do much worse than to think about what legacy we all share in his work. I would also just like to say that this is a very distinguished group of people. I'm slightly intimidated to hear. Swapan Dasgupta was very modest when he said he'd been the object of condescension. He's actually, I think, one of the very few conservative Indian thinkers to have broken through to the point that even Ramachandra Guha has said to me, well, you know, yes, Swapan, yes, he's got a mind. But this is someone who has, over the years, managed to make an impression on people who don't share his assumptions and beliefs. We're very lucky to have him. And I also see in the audience my friend, and really when it comes to India, to some degree, my mentor, Ram Madhav, who has been a leader for many years in connecting thinkers in India and thinkers in other countries around the world and working to develop this concept of a conservatism that isn't limited by east-west divides, north-south divides, but can actually speak to people around the world. So, and then I see one of the co-organizers of the conference is with us. I see a former director of the World Bank. I see perhaps a future Secretary of Defense. It's it's a little bit intimidating to look out at all of you. I asked the organizers before I spoke, how long should I go on? And they said, oh, don't worry, really, you know, you're the last, so you can take extra time. I said, well, how much time? They said, well, think of Fidel Castro speaking on the anniversary of the Cuban Revolution. 3-4 hours, just really try to give the subject a complete treatment. So I'm going to do my best. I wanted to make 2 points, just 2 points, about India's rise and what it means and could mean for the United States and the world. The first point, I think, should be pretty reassuring and cheering to Americans. The second point is more sobering, but they both need to be taken into account. So what's the good news? Good news is this: the rise of India has the potential to create the kind of Asia Americans have always wanted to see. What do I mean by that? For 200 years, and America's been dealing with Asia for that long. I think our first military presence in Asia dates to 1819, when we had a naval squadron there to protect U.S. sailors. But the uneven development has been our nemesis in Asia. That is, the British developed before anybody else and come soaring out of their islands and create this enormous empire, which actually presents Americans with problems because the British aren't necessarily that interested in letting Americans have a kind of a fair in with that. And that was not good news for our ancestors. Then when the British kind of began to feel their age, the French and others from Europe are coming out. But then you get Japan, which develops before any other Asian country, and the Japanese have these delusions of grandeur. You know, we can rule the whole thing. we are going to be this, we're going to unite Asia, we're going to rule it. The United States, as some of you may have heard, actually had to fight a rather difficult war before that could be settled. After that came the Soviet Union, again with this same idea. Today we can see that China, which has developed with enormous rapidity in the last 30, 40 years, has this illusion that China can dominate Asia, can be the hegemonic ruler of all Asia, and impose a vision, impose an order on it. The rise of India, and it will be accompanied by Vietnam, by Indonesia, by many other Asian states, the economic development of India to its full potential will end that delusion in China. This is partly about balance of power, that a larger Indian economy would support a military that would make it clear to China that there are limits and bounds, but it's also about culture, about the weight in the world of India being such a large presence, now with a larger population than China. As India develops, it simply demonstrates to China that the road to hegemony is closed. If there is a chance for the international tensions around the rise of China to end without a great power war, I am convinced that the rise of India, the rapid economic rise and development of India, is the world's best path to peace. So when I see my Indian friends and colleagues working to develop their economy, working to find the deep sources in their culture that can allow India to progress without losing its sense of self and its balance as a society, it warms my heart and increases my hope for the future, and for the future of the United States as well as of India and the rest of the world. Okay, so that's the good news, and it's really good. Okay? What's the more concerning news or the more challenging news? The news is this: the rise of India will make clear to everybody, including even Americans, that the age of Western domination, of the West setting the world's agenda, has come to an end. And this is a challenging thought. But again, India is so big, China is so big, Indonesia is so big, their economies are so big. There is simply no way that the West, for all of its civilizational accomplishments, for all of its economic power, and for all, in my view, of the brilliance and the lucidity of the spiritual heritage that has shaped the West, it is not the last word or the only word to be spoken in the history of our species. Global civilization is not the universalization of the West. Others have a vote. The emergence of India, the emergence of an Indian conservatism, the emergence of a vision of India that is grounded in India's cultural and religious roots, poses a real challenge to those of us in the West who've somewhat naively assumed, and I think this includes many conservatives as well as liberals, that a cosmopolitan world will obviously will be shaped by Western values, that global progress means that we're all going to become more like Europe, or maybe specifically more like Sweden. And at the end of time, we'll all be rich, we'll all be cosmopolitan, we'll all be blonde, and we'll all eat herring. And we'll be peaceful. And that's the future. And that, I think, has been the kind of default account that many people have carried in their heads. Many Western conservatives, many American patriots. We need to engage with India. We need to understand the challenge that the rise of India poses to some of these beliefs. And we need, in a spirit of friendship and equality, to engage. I'm so old that I can remember when Joe Biden was young. all right? What's the old saying? I'm so old, I remember when the Dead Sea was still sick. But, and I have seen many changes in my life. The rise of India will bring the world to something far more challenging than we've experienced in the past. It will test our assumptions, but I believe it will lead to a better world. And the faster we can get on with it, the better. I am personally so grateful to friends like Swapan and Ram who have helped me at least begin to understand. I will never get there. Some of the younger people in this audience perhaps will. And I'm going to close with one piece of advice. Last 30 or 40 years, a lot of bright young people in America have understood that our future is bound up with the Indo-Pacific. And that if they really wanted to, whether they wanted economic success, to understand how the world works, or to be leaders in American foreign policy, they needed to begin to understand this region of the world. Now, 98% of them then went to China and studied Mandarin and launched business careers in China or policy careers in China. Look, I'm glad we have more China expertise in America than we did 30 or 40 years ago. I'm grateful for it. But we need something else now. We need this generation of young Americans to realize that India is a place they need to understand, not just, by the way, Indians who speak English. The overwhelming majority of Indians do not speak English. Young Americans need to learn North Indian languages, South Indian languages, become familiar with the regions and cultures of India, have friends from India. So those of you who are under 30 in this room, and I believe that some of you are, let me just put that in your mind, that going to learn India, you may have the same kind of opportunities ahead of you that young Americans who launched their careers in China in the 1980s did. But thank you very much for this.